So a lot of people have said before and after CES, but CES is one of those kind of natural accelerants in the cadence of the media universe, that 2014 is going to be the year of native advertising, content marketing, adaptive marketing, and have said it in a way that kind of commingles those three concepts to some extent. But I think the way you would summarize them is, what does content created by brands that is not advertising look like in terms of the timing of its production, the nature of its production, and the nature of its distribution? And I guess that kind of wraps it up. If you think about native advertising, there are many different definitions of it, and I don't think that Webster's has sort of bothered to define it specifically as yet. But I like to think about it as three things, really. And I think about form, functionality, and context. And my perspective is that native advertising had to score on at least two of those three things. So is it in the form of the host medium? And if it is, a sponsored post on Facebook is native advertising. That's fine. If it's functionality, a sponsored post on Facebook is still fine. So Facebook's mobile stream is really native advertising on at least two of those three counts. When you add context to it, it becomes interesting. And you could argue that Facebook, once again, particularly if it has a social context, actually scores the trifecta that's required. So you could then argue that the biggest single stream of native advertising was the Facebook newsfeed. And you could make similar kinds of arguments about Twitter. When you go beyond those stream-based media, thinking about native advertising is a bit more complex. So the New York Times example, if you're being dismissive about it, you could say, goodness, we haven't come very far from banners and buttons when there's a button on a New York Times page, or many New York Times pages, which is a button that has the Dell logo on it and points people to an article that is contextually relevant to Dell's business, written in the manner of New York Times journalism and the expectations of their readers, and then you have a kind of contextually specific one. When people think about adaptive marketing, they think about it, I think, in two key ways. One is, how do you change marketing, both in terms of the weight of marketing, the targeting of marketing, and the timing of marketing, to respond to the data that's present in the market? And the second way you think about it is on those same vectors, but about some specific context that's available in the market. So on the first hand, you may see that it's snowing in Idaho, but not somewhere else, and your ability to be responsive to a rapid change of the weather in terms of saying, we're going to advertise snow shovels rather than barbecues, is a kind of base form of responsive and adaptive marketing. If, on the other hand, you set yourself up in this newsroom-like environment and say, what I want to do is I want to find the trends in the world, and the trends in the world with which I can draw a connection with the brand, that's another form of adaptive and responsive marketing. So it's important, as I always say, to kind of create a relevant taxonomy about what you're talking about. So native is form, function, context, and responsive or adaptive is either data-driven to circumstance or context-driven about what's going on in the world around you. So that's the sort of framework I like to think about. And I think when agencies and advertisers have to think about it, then that's how they should think about it as well. Now, clearly, some people are better at reading data really quickly than others and can respond to it. And I think media agencies are really good at understanding and ingesting the feeds, whether they come from sales numbers or Twitter followers or Facebook fans. I think we're really good at that. And I think agencies are generally very good at producing those short turnaround, fast response. And we all know the stories about Oreos and the Super Bowl and the Mars rover and the stories connected with that. We know about Tide and the NASCAR track fire and those kinds of things. And I think agencies and brand newsrooms together are really good at that. The place where people are challenged most, I think, on many, many counts, is on the longer form content as opposed to the short form bite-sized content, because writing things that have resonance and relevance for both a brand and the consumers of that brand in the manner of the medium and the context of the medium in which they're consuming it is difficult. And you would expect that the two main sources of that would either be the publishers themselves, because they know what their voice is like and they can hire people to write in their voice, or you would think that the PR and corporate communications people were the strongest people to write in that kind of area. And I think that's a kind of general truth. So if you've got either the publisher producing the content or the corporate comms people or PR people producing the content in that longer form, you're probably in a good place, but depending on who does it, also then either constrains or opens up the distribution of that content. Because it's relatively hard to get someone to write for the New York Times, for example, and then have that content distributed off the New York Times into many, many other places. And you might argue that you've lost some of the form and function by taking it out of the Times and moving it along. And equally, if you're writing it from a corporate comms perspective, trying to draw the difference between it and a press release or some other form of marketing is difficult. And we're finding a lot of advertisers now are looking at platforms like LinkedIn, which has a broad context of I use LinkedIn to promote and understand and develop my professional self. So if I think that is the wide definition of LinkedIn. And so I think about it as a corporation, that if I want people to follow me, and people do follow corporations, there's over about 15 companies now, maybe not quite that many, at least 10, that have over 1 million people following their content on LinkedIn, then those people think, this is interesting because I can publish into the LinkedIn environment to my followers and achieve sharing. And in that place, the right people to be producing are often corporate comms people, freelancers, and in some cases the executives themselves. So Richard Branson writes to the LinkedIn Influencers Program, Martin Sorrell writes to the Influencers Program, Jeff Immelt writes for the Influencers Program, and so forth. And so a broad sort of walk through the taxonomy, the challenges and the players in native, adaptive content and responsive marketing feels a bit like that.